Well, we want to welcome everyone to our final meaningful conversation for the month of August. I hope you've enjoyed the various persons and personalities we've had during the month. And I am so excited about our special guest for this month. His name is Sherman Smith. Sherman Smith is the former running back coach for the Seattle Seahawks, and a very good friend, a personal friend, a friend of our family, and a friend of our ministry. And so we're glad. So welcome, Sherman. Glad to see you.
Hey, Doc. Glad to be here, man. Good seeing you. Chrystal, good seeing you guys.
Yeah,
Good to see you too. He's got his Kingdom Man shirt on.
he got
Dad.
his Kingdom Man shirt on, so that says a lot right
You
there.
guys blessed me with this shirt. Now, I want to represent.
Well, that's right. That's what you get when you support the urban alternative. I mean, you get a shirt. So thanks. Chrystal's here. She's my oldest daughter. I asked her to join me for this interview. Now, we met. You actually are the running back for the Seattle Seahawks at that time, right?
Yes.
And that was what year? What year was that?
See, Doc, we met in 1979
Whoa.
at a PAO conference in San Bernardino.
Okay.
And you were one of the speakers.
Oh, okay. 79. I'm really feeling old right now. Okay.
Well, Doc, I'm right there with you. And I tell you, you were always one of the guest speakers at PAO, one of the favorites. And I just remember when you spoke, and when we met, Sharon and I was walking around the facility there, and you and Lois were out shooting baskets.
Oh,
and that's when we met physically. I remember that. Yeah, man. So,
my father and my mother were outside shooting
father
baskets.
and your mother, yeah.
That's good to know.
They were shooting baskets.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I don't remember that. You got a pretty good memory there. I don't remember.
Oh, yeah.
I remember PAO, but not the shooting baskets part.
It was a significant moment to me, but probably not to you. I understand that.
Well, that's good. Now, you played in the NFL. Run that down from here. Your playing days before you started coaching.
Okay, yeah, I played 9 years in the league. I was drafted by the Seahawks in '76 when they were an expansion team. So I played for them for 7 years. Then my last 2 years, I played in San Diego.
Okay.
And then after that, Doc, that's when I, retired from coaching and went into teaching and coaching. I coached high school for 5 years, then coached on the college level for 5 years, and then coached in the NFL for 22 years.
Oh, wow.
22 years. Okay. Run down your NFL coaching. Run down your NFL coaching tree.
Yeah, that coaching tree. Yeah, so. Let's see where it started. Well, it started with the Houston Oilers when the Houston Oilers were still the Houston Oilers. That's when Jeff Fisher got hired. So we were there for 2 years. Then we came to Tennessee and became the Tennessee Titans. And so I coached them for a total of 13 years. Then went to the Washington Redskins for 2 years when Jim Zorn was the head coach. And Doc, you played a big role in that, in me making that decision to go there. And then my last 7 years in Seattle with the Seahawks.
Well, there's a little personal story here because my son, Jonathan Evans, was a fullback for Baylor University. Mm-hmm. And then he had the opportunity to be coached briefly by Sherman Smith in two places.
Yes.
Tennessee and Washington.
Right. And Jonathan, it was fun coaching Jonathan. It was great. Great young man, I loved him. He came out there every day, Doc, and he worked hard and, did good things. And that's why, when I left Tennessee and we got to Washington, we had a chance to bring him there. We brought him to Washington with us. And so, it was a blessing to be able to spend time with such a quality young man like Jonathan.
Well, that's great. Well, now, your personal testimony, becoming and growing as a Christian. Tell me about that.
Well, I always tell people my story. I'm like a Luke 19 story, with Zacchaeus, Jesus was coming through and he wanted to see who Jesus was. And like it says in the story, people were getting in the way. So he needed to run down the street and he climbed up a sycamore tree. And, for me, Doc, growing up, I wanted to know who Jesus was, but I'm a visual learner. And so, people were telling me about Jesus, but the things they were telling me, their life and their words didn't go together. And so I just found it kind of conflicting. They were getting in the way. And so I just said, God, I really want to know you, but I need somebody to show me. And so in 1976, I was drafted by the Seattle Seahawks. And I realized, we don't make spiritual appointments, we keep them. And God was keeping a spiritual appointment between myself and a guy named Ken Hutcherson. And, he became that sycamore tree for me. And I think the thing that stood out his testimony was when he blew his knee out in the final preseason game in our inaugural year in 1976. We had been friends and we talked, and I knew he was a Christian and he was a little different. So I go in the locker room and I want to comfort him the way he's been comforting me, be a friend to him, And so here's my chance to lift him up. So I go in the locker room and he's sitting on the table, has ice packs on his knee, and he has a big smile on his face. And I'm looking at him saying, man, what's this guy's problem? They just told him his career is over with, and he's sitting up here with a smile on his face. And it's almost like the Red Sea. There were a lot of guys around him when I walked in the room, and all of a sudden it was just he and I in that room. And like I said, I noticed a smile on his face, and he said, Sherman, he said, you don't know how excited I am. He said, I'm excited to see what God has planned for my life. And he could see that look on my face, and I was confused, like, man, you're excited? Your career's over with, your knee is blown out. And that's when he said, you see, Sherman, I'm a Christian, and nothing happens in my life that's not filtered through God's hands first. And that's when I said, right there in that locker room, I said, please tell me more about Jesus Christ. And he shared the gospel with me right there in that locker room. And I didn't accept Christ at that moment, but it was at that time that, man, I began on my journey. And it was later on that I accepted Christ, and Hutch became a very pivotal guy in my life, a mentor, my teacher, my friend, all of that to me. And so that's how it started for me with Ken Hutcherson.
Well, that's exciting. That's exciting. And you've kind of kept the fire all these years. Every time I talk to you, I'm hearing fire.
Well, I've been blessed, Doc, that the men that God has placed in my life, they've been those type of men, the Ken Hutchersons, the Tony Evans, those guys have been mentors. When I talk about the men that have made a difference in my life spiritually, I look at you and Ken Hutcherson as being spiritual fathers to me. And that's just the truth. And so, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. I love your teaching, your personality, how God speaks through you and lives through you. And I just love your fire. So, I thank God that he allowed our lives to intersect.
Well, it's so good having you. Well, I wanted not only our church audience and our broader national audience, but specifically Chrystal to hear your story. This is a very unique, exciting, confusing sometimes story about your son. So, would you walk us through this story of you and your son?
Yeah, well, we're talking about my oldest son, Dylan, because I have a younger son, Sherman.
Right.
But my oldest son, Dylan, in 1990, we had just moved back to Miami University. We had been in Seattle when I had a chance to, go back to my alma mater and become a coach. And so my relationship with Dylan, it began when I recruited him when he was a senior in high school. And I recruited him to play a running back for me at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. So I was fortunate that he signed and he committed and he came there, and I had a chance to coach him for 2 years. And we had a great relationship, in recruiting him and spending time. So even though when I left Miami, we stayed in contact, even after his career was over with, we stayed in contact. And so he was just a great guy. And then he got into coaching, and we had a chance to continue to bond in coaching. He came out to Seattle and did an internship for me out there in 2014. He came out and did an internship. So, our relationship just continued, hey, I was Coach Smith, I was Dylan, and we just had a great relationship. And so, knowing about his family and kids. So what happened in 2017, Dylan called me up right before Thanksgiving, probably about 8 days before Thanksgiving. And he said, hey, he texted me, he said, hey, I need to talk to you about something. So I was thinking, he had a job opportunity that was coming up. So I said, well, let me give him a call and see what's going on. So when I called him up, he wasn't talking about football. He was saying, well, that I'm adopted. And I said, yeah, And he said, well, I started the process of looking for my biological parents. And I said, man, that's great. And, and he said, well, I just received my original birth record. I said, oh man, I'm rejoicing with this guy. Hey man, that's good news. And he said, yeah, I found my biological mom. Oh man. And I'm just, man, Dylan, that's good to hear, man. And yeah, she's from Youngstown and I'm from Youngstown. And oh my God, this is good stuff. And then he told me her name and my heart dropped. And my heart dropped because I knew Carol, his biological mom, I knew Carol, so, and then before that could sink in, he said, and I asked her who my father was, and she said, you. And it was like, boom, that it just caught me totally by surprise, and so I'm muttering, I'm stuttering, I'm incoherent, I'm babbling and all that other stuff. And I just told him, I said, hey, man, I need to call you back in a little bit because I need to process this, But the information, when he called me up, he was great. He said, well, he said, here's the deal, she said that you're my dad. He said, if you aren't my dad, that's okay. He said, because we have a relationship. He said, if you are my dad, we'll just build on our relationship. And, so he was just talking in those terms. And like I said, my head was just swimming at that time because, Dylan knew that, he was adopted. He was looking for his biological parents. He found his biological mom and he asked her who her dad was. His dad was, and she said me. Dylan's biological mom, Carol, knew that she had put a son up for adoption 45 years ago. And so she was excited to get that phone call from that son that, that she had put up for adoption. And so, man, they were excited. Well, for me, when I got that phone call, I didn't know that I had a son out there. I didn't know I had a son. So it just totally took me by surprise. The only thing that I'd say that was interesting was in our time together at Miami University, and then when he came out to Seattle to do internship, guys would always say something to us about you guys look alike, you talk alike, you got gestures alike. Even when we were at Miami University, guys said to Dylan, man, that got to be your dad. And and Dylan, and when we were at Seattle, the line coach, he came over, Pat Rule, his office was right across from mine. And he came across the hall one day and said, man, this is crazy, man. He said, man, you guys could be father and son. Wow. And I never connected anything. Dylan and I laugh at all the time. That's man, what they say, we all look alike, so I was just passing off on that. And so that's what happened. That's how it began. Our relationship began when he was a senior in high school, and it continued until, he called and revealed to me that, Carol said that I was his father. I told him before I hung up from him and said I had to process, I told him, that I knew Carol and I could not tell you that I was not could not be your father because I knew that I knew Carol in that way where I could be his father. So I told him I couldn't deny that. So after the conversation went on and, the next couple of days, I said, hey, let's get a paternity test. I know Carol's sure. I just want to be sure, and so Dylan was fine with that. And we got a paternity test and it was 99.999% that I was his dad, so. And I would say for me, Dr. Chrystal, when I first heard about it, like I said, for Dylan, there was excitement. For Carol, there was excitement. For me, there was no excitement. For me, it was probably more, I was really disappointed. I was hurt. It was painful to me at first. And the pain was not about Dylan. It was about the situation. That I just really had felt that I had been that irresponsible, that this young man grew up not knowing who his father was. I was blessed to know my father. I was blessed to have my father in my life, and I know the difference that he made in my life. And I pray that I made a difference in my son Sherman's life and in my daughter Siobhan's life. And I just felt so irresponsible that I had done that I was responsible for this young man being in that position. So I just really felt bad about it. And really part of me, when we were first talking about me being his father, I was hoping that I wasn't his father only so that I wouldn't have to feel bad about putting him in that position. It wasn't about him. It was, I could absolve myself of this guilt that I was feeling for being that irresponsible, that I had fathered a child when I was in high school and wasn't there to be a part of his life. And God brought me through that healing process. He used my wife, Sharon was tremendous in this healing process, where when I told her that night about Dylan, and she said, hey, if he's your son, our family just got bigger, and she just greeted him with open arms, and was helping me get through the pain that I was dealing with, and just understanding. I just felt bad. I just really felt bad. So I believe God allowed me to feel the pain for a while. I really did. ESPN did a story on it, and they called it Identity. When they were first doing it, John Minton, the producer, he asked me, he said, well, what would you title it? And I said I would title it From Guilt to Grace, because that's where it was. I just felt guilt, and then God's grace came in and just overwhelmed me to the point where, I just welcomed it with open arms and allowed myself to move past the guilt that I felt and embrace the situation and welcome this new son and 4 grandsons and daughter-in-law.
Wow. Well, you had to tell Sharon. So
yes,
you kind of got into that a little bit. So how did you work it up in your head? How am I going to say this? And how worried were you about what she was going to say? How was that process?
Well, I tell you what, at first, when Dylan told me that, it was a Wednesday morning, I believe it was. When Dylan told me that morning, at first I wasn't going to tell Sharon or my kids until I knew for sure. And I was going to wait until we got a paternity test, and then I would tell them. I didn't want to open up that can of worms if I didn't have to. So
right.
I'm not going to say anything. But honestly, I felt so bad, that day. It was just overwhelming me that I just said, I just have to tell her. And so Sharon was in the kitchen cooking dinner or something, and I just said, hey, I need to talk to you. And, she turned off the stove and came in there, sat down, and I went through the story, and I just told her about Dylan. She knew Dylan because, we had recruited Dylan.
Yeah.
So she knew Dylan. When Dylan came out to Seattle, she knew Dylan. So, so I told her what was going on, and I just told her, that he found his biological mom, and she said that I was his father. And like I said, for Sharon, you want to talk about God's grace. There's no question. You would hope that every godly woman would handle it that way, but you would hope you wouldn't put her in that position. But, if you did, Sharon was great. She didn't flinch. She didn't flinch. Like I said, she said, hey, if he's your son, our family just got bigger. And she said, we need to make plans to go out and meet our grandkids. And so Sharon was moving forward with it. And ever since, Sharon's just been excited about it. When we got the results back from the DNA test, Dylan called me up and told me the results, and I told Sharon. Sharon started jumping up and down, screaming and hollering, and I'm excited. She was just so excited about the process, and she has embraced Dylan and those 4 grandsons of ours like they are her kids. She looks to Dylan like, that's my son. Her grace has just been unbelievable. God has just been great, as the grace that he's shown through her has been tremendous. And then when I had to tell my kids, my oldest daughter lives here, Sherman lives here in Nashville, so I drove to her townhouse and told her she was great. She said, well, I always wanted an older brother, but she asked, right after I said that, she said, well, how's mom? I said, mom is great. Then when my younger son, Sherman, they came to town for Thanksgiving, and I told him and my daughter-in-law at that time, and he was fine too. And he said, I'm good. His next question was, how's mom? So I said, your mom is great. So they followed her lead, and they were great. And, and Sharon was great. So the whole family embraced the new addition to our family, the new blessing to our family very well.
As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, because hearing your story for me in its entirety, I've gotten glimpses and hints of it over the years, that there's this guy named Sherman Smith, and it has something to do with football and something to do with the son that he was around but didn't know. So me having the opportunity to kind of sit here and absorb your story, I have so many things popping off in my mind about it. One is, I just want to say to you, not only your wife's response, but your children's response to this new family member, I actually think is a credit to you. I think there's a family culture that both you and your wife had already been feeding over the years, that everybody else was concerned about everybody else, because a lot of times in those scenarios when something hard comes, the first response of any individual is, how does this affect me? Not how does it affect the people that I love? So I think that there was already a lot of grace that had been given from one person to another in your family. Seems like y'all have a grace-filled home. And I really believe that you are a part of that. And so the grace that you needed in that season was just a U-turn of grace that you'd probably given out more than you maybe are giving yourself credit for. But the other thing I was thinking is, that I'm stuck at, because in my head, he played football for you for like a season and you discovered this. You know, in my head, it was like maybe 2 or 3 seasons at the most. And I think what I heard you say is like 17 years. I think I heard you say 1990 to 2017. Is that right?
Well, that 1990, that's when I went back to Miami and I started coaching. So that 1990 is when I met Dylan. And so that's when he began Chrystal. That's when he went to college. And so I only coached him for 2 years. And then that's when I left and went on to further my coaching career.
But there is a period, though, of 17 years from your first encounter with him until you find out. I mean, this is a long time to know of somebody. And when you talked about guilt, I think, when you talk about the emotions of shame and guilt, sometimes the longer we've lived with something, the knowledge of how long it's been since we first became aware of something, I think that length of time feeds into the depth of the guilt that we feel.
I hear you.
And so I think a lot of people struggle with guilt for a variety of reasons. Some things that they totally had a hand in, that they totally made decisions about with full knowledge. And some, in your case, that it's not that there was no part for them, but it just wasn't a full knowledge encounter. And I think that as you were talking, a lot of people can resonate with guilt about something that they did, guilt about something they can't shake, guilt about something that's 40 years ago, and they have not been able to take it off. When you talk about going from guilt to grace, what enabled you to take off the layers of guilt? Obviously, your family's grace was a part of that, but what was the process for you of not feeling bad?
Well, I tell you, that's a great question. I just think at some point, by the time that Dylan had got the results back, I think God had just taken me through that process, of more or less I started forgiving myself because everyone else around me was saying, my kids, Siobhan and Sherman, and, hey, Dad, you didn't know. But I still knew that I was responsible. They say that irresponsibility is never neutral because someone always becomes responsible for what you've been irresponsible for. And even Dylan's adoptive mom, I mean, she was even great in the process of helping me heal myself. And people said, stop beating yourself up. And so I think, the thing that really got me was, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. And I think what helped me get through it was God told me this, once again, stop thinking about yourself. Because I was thinking about how bad I felt. And God said, stop thinking about yourself, And so I was just thinking about Dylan and how excited he was. And, and then his kids and my kids and my wife. And so I think that helped me move past it a little bit where I just stopped focusing on my pain. It wasn't any shame. I didn't have any shame, I said, man, I'm a Christian, hey, you know what? I said, I was 17 years old when Carol got pregnant. And, hey, at that time I was 63. So a lot of growth had taken place then, so I wasn't going to go back there. But I think God allowed me to move past it because I just stopped thinking about myself in that sense of the pain that I felt and just moved on and just embraced the situation and thank God that, the way it worked out.
Well, I know you have a big burden for men. We've talked about that a number of times. You love to minister to men, the challenges of men. Let's broaden this beyond you. What are you seeing today related to men, and what is your message? What is your emphasis when you have spoken to them or challenged them, whether it's a speaking engagement or whether it's been your players?
Well, it's funny when I go somewhere and I speak about this story. I would share the story like if I speak at a chapel service to an NFL team or a college team. These guys are, that young age where they can find themselves in certain situations, where they have to make some good decisions. And so as I share that story with them, this story of grace, I would always tell them, but you don't want to do it that way. You don't want to find out when you're 63 years old that you have a 45-year-old son. You don't want to do it that way. I said, it's a great story. It's God taking a mess and making a miracle out of it. It's God doing what God does. I said, you don't want to do it that way. And so I would just try to encourage those guys along those lines, because I would always tell them that at this age, you need to understand that all behavior is an attempt to reach a goal, whether or not you're fully aware of that goal. You need to understand what you're doing, And then I would just, like I said earlier, that being irresponsible is never neutral. Someone becomes responsible for what you've been irresponsible for. And so I was just encouraging these guys along those lines of making good decisions. And then I would always ask the single guys, I would say, how many of you single guys plan on getting married? They'd all raise their hands. And I would say to them, right now you are practicing for marriage. You are practicing for marriage right now. And I said, I know I was told this when I played football, and your coaches have probably told you that you're going to play the way you practice. I said, you need to understand you are practicing for marriage right now, and you're going to play the way you practice. So how are you practicing right now? So I was just trying to encourage guys along those lines to understand the decisions that they're making right now, the importance of making good decisions and how they can impact the lives of other people as you go on. And so so that's been the message I've been giving them, as I encourage them in their faith. But a lot of times, guys they're not Christian, but I just encourage them along the lines of just understanding the decisions that they make and how they can impact not just you, but other people.
Well, I know you're not, well, I guess, 2 years you retired out of coaching?
Yes.
2 years, okay. And a lot has happened here recently in our nation. As a former coach and as a person who's also seeing the news, looking at what's happening in our community, we've gone from a health pandemic now to a cultural pandemic, racially and culturally. What are you seeing, and how do you feel about what you see?
Well, I tell you, as I look at it, I kind of look at it and say, man, I believe God's word doesn't return void. And I think a lot of it, as I look at the church and I look at what's happening in our world, I think is a reflection of that we haven't been on the job. We haven't done what we're supposed to do. I think the church has kind of conformed to the world instead of the world conforming to the church. And so I just look at us as a church, as a body of believers, and say, man, this is a sin that we've been quiet about. We've been complicit with. And so as I just look at the racism part of it, I just say, man, God, I just don't think that, we've been the salt and the light like you called us to be, that we have made the difference. For me, Doc, I know you talk about 2 Chronicles 15. I always go to 2 Chronicles 17, where, everybody runs to that. And my people who are called by my name, they'll humble themselves and pray, but I went back a few verses before that. And God said, if I dry up the land and cause a drought, and I send the locusts to devour the land and send the pestilence among my people. Then he says, and if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I'll hear from heaven and forgive their sins and heal their land. So I was thinking about that and saying, man, God is speaking to us individually and collectively as a church. God is saying, man, if you will repent of your sins and seek my face. So I said, man, God, what is it that we need to do as a church? Because, Doc, in the 7 letters in Ephesians and Revelations, as God wrote the letters to the church, he said, I have this against you. And so I went and started reading those 7 letters. And I just looked at the things that God was saying to that church. And I said, man, God, this is what you're saying to me individually. And this is what you're saying to us collectively as a church. And so we just need to be more committed. We need to stop being lukewarm. We need to not forsake our first love. So I just think God will speak. I think he's giving a message to the church. I think it's a chance for us to really come out and do this differently when we get another chance. So I just think God is speaking to the church.
Oh, I think that is, right on point, right on point. Yeah, now, Dylan is coaching with the Chiefs?
Yes.
So he's got a Super Bowl ring.
Yeah, he got one of those. Yes, he got a Super Bowl ring.
He got a Super Bowl ring. Okay. Now, you have a Super Bowl ring. Well, you have,
yes.
How many of them?
One.
You just have one. Okay. And that was
Yeah,
what
just have one.
Just
Coached in 3 Super Bowls, but only got one.
Okay,
So.
you coached in 3, but you got one. Okay. So the spiritual temperature right now, the whole sports thing is on front page. Number one, whether there's going to be sports, particularly with the COVID situation, and and the kneeling and the not kneeling and all of that. How do you weigh into all of that at all, or do you kind of just say it's too confusing? What do you do with all that?
Well, in 2016, I believe my last year coaching in the league, we started making gestures toward, the racial injustice in our country. And so what we decided to do at that time, instead of taking a knee, you may remember throughout the NFL, everybody linked arms. So we all linked arms and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're all going to link arms and say, hey, we want to bring some notice to, what's going on with police brutality and racism. And so then it was the next year when it really hit ahead after President Trump came out and made the comments that he made about the guys that were kneeling. That's when it really got hot. That's when it got hot. And so I was out of the league then. And so I said, man, what would I do if I was in the league right now? I remember sitting in a team meeting. The Seattle Seahawks came and played the Tennessee Titans, and I went down to see some of the guys, and they had a meeting that night, and man, it was a hot meeting because they were talking about it. And I remember one of the guys saying, my daughters are going to ask me, what did you do during this time? What did you do to make a difference during this time? And this guy, Michael Bennett, who just retired from football, he said, I'm going to do something. We're supposed to do something. And so he wanted to take a stand. So I just look at it and say right now, as I look at it, if I were coaching in the league or playing in the league, I would take a stand. I would if take a stand. If it meant kneeling during the national anthem, I would kneel because I know it's not a disrespect to the flag. I'm not saying I don't appreciate the men and women that died. It would be none of that. It would be, I would say, yeah, I want people to know, so I would take a knee and take a stand. And so if my kids ask me, what did you say? What did you do? I said, I want to do something. I want to know people know what I stand for.
Okay.
I wanted to ask too. I know you took a left turn and you went into football, but if I can come back a little bit out of football for just a second. This is our whole life. Like we can talk about anything, and he can go into football, and we lost him. But anyway, that's okay. You just were saying I would do something, and I was thinking actually getting back a little bit to your story about, and you were asking him about men and his heart for men. And I know personally and just anecdotally with conversations I have with friends that sometimes what men will struggle with is because of guilt or being overwhelmed, because Dad was just saying, like, if you were in this position now, what would you do, or would you be overwhelmed by it all? What do you say to the man, whether we're talking about to the person, whether we're talking about what's racially happening in society or maybe guilt that they're experiencing personally, and they really are just overwhelmed? Like, if I do this one thing, it's not going to matter. I've heard men that have known about children that they've had but haven't been engaged and involved. And then, that guilt piles up over time. And then that child is 20-something years old and, well, it doesn't matter now. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or maybe it's just culturally. People are waking up to things that they didn't know before. They're reading the books, they're reading social media, and they're like, well, what can I do? So if you were going to challenge a person who's listening to you, and whether it's personal, maybe it's guilt, maybe it's societal, and they're overwhelmed or feeling guilty about what they haven't done up to now, what is your challenge or encouragement to that person who is feeling stuck because of those things, guilt, overwhelm? What would be your encouragement?
Well, I think you'd have to start with yourself and just say, man, what do you really believe? Where are you at in this process of, in your growth? If it's making a stand for something, with the social climate, or if it's spiritual, you start with yourself before you try to impact others. Make sure that you understand what you believe. And so the change always begins with yourself. And, and then if, like Doc said, I enjoy encouraging men, in their faith. And so if they're men of faith, then it's easy to bring God's word into it and to say, as a child of God, we can give the spiritual aspect of it and who in our identity in Christ, because our identity is key in our spiritual growth and understanding who we are and whose we are. So I can bring that aspect in it. But if guys aren't, but you still want to encourage them, Chrystal, along the lines of just what they believe and help them along the lines of just where they've come from. And it's really interesting dealing with a lot of guys as they get to that process. They make a leap, all of a sudden they're thinking differently than they used to when they were 21, 22 years old. They're thinking, man, worldwide. They're thinking about wanting to make an impact in our society. And so a lot of them just, sometimes they leap before they look, and so they're just out there. They got a lot of zeal. So I would just say, man, what do you believe? Educate yourself on what you believe and just understand what you're doing and find out, talk to other people and release yourself. I had a lot of guys, like you said, had kids that they had not been responsible for. We challenged them to become responsible, find that child, talk to that child, do what you have to do, but start with yourself before you start trying to start with someone else.
And one other question about that, because you said you had your father, then you said Ken Hutchinson and Tony Evans were mentors for you. What would you say to the man who doesn't have that, doesn't have their father, doesn't feel like they have access to mentors that they can pick up the phone and call them? And so maybe there's a little bit of a crisis because trying to figure out what you believe when someone hasn't been there to guide you in that, and everything has been trial and error, that can make life a little intimidating.
Yes.
So what would you say to that man who feels like he's missing that, and maybe you were able to stand firm because you had a belief system and you had guidance? What would you say to the man who doesn't feel like he's had that?
Oh man, I tell you what, I think a lot. I think back a lot and say, man, I wonder what my life would be like if I had not met Hutch, if I didn't have a Tony Evans in my life, if I didn't have, a Chris Williamson in my life, if I didn't have these guys, I don't know what it would be like. Hopefully God may have raised someone else up in my life because he knew that that's what I wanted. And, Chris, that's a hard one. What do you say to him, man? Seek out a guy, if I could be that guy, if I can be that guy, I'll try to be that guy that can be here for you to talk to you, but, just to say, man, I was blessed. I think you got to surround yourself with people that, that you want to be like, so I was fortunate that it's easy to gravitate toward Hutch and toward Doc because these were guys that I wanted to be like. These guys that I said, man, every time I'm around them, I walk away and I said, man, I want what he has. I want that. I want to grow like that. I want to be a man like that. And so I would say you got to surround yourself with the type of people that you want to be like, and you got to find those guys. I truly believe those guys are out there and they're looking. One thing I always did when I was coaching, starting in high school, I told the players, you may not be looking for a father, but I'm going to treat you like you're my sons. And so that's why it was always funny about this dealing story because here it was, I was making that statement and I find out that I actually was coaching my son, but I tried to relate to all the players just like they were my son, and talk to them about not just football, but everything in life. And so I tried to be that for guys. And so I would ask guys, man, I hope you can seek that out and find that type of guy. That all I can do is encourage them to do that because it's hard to do it, like you said, Chrystal, to have a belief system and you don't have anyone that, you can look at and say, yeah, that gives me a picture of how it's done. I can ask them, hey, how do I go about doing this? How do I go about becoming a kingdom man? How do I do that? And for them to be in your life and be able to give you some direction.
Seek them out.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We have appreciated you personally, appreciated you and your lovely, beautiful wife, appreciated your friendship, your support, all your kindness, and your testimony. And you, I'm sure God has a lot of great things in store for using this story as he did on television and now through your speaking to impact the lives of many people, but men in particular. So God bless you, Sherman Smith, and thank you for giving us some of your time.
Well, Doc, thank you. And I just want to tell you this, Doc, I remember when I called you and told you the story, about dealing. And you said something to me then. You said, God has allowed this story to be revealed at this time for a reason. And I just want you to know that that's how true that is, Doc, and how when I would go out and I would share the story in speaking engagements, one thing that happened, Chrystal, you need to know what was interesting. I would share that story And every time I shared that story, someone would come up at the end of the speaking engagement and tell me their story. They would tell me that, you know what, I am going through what you just went through. Or I'm the person that's looking for my biological parents. Hey, I'm encouraged to do this. So God used that story in so many ways that, every time that I've shared that story, someone came up and they were encouraged by it, encouraged to seek out the relationship with that child, encouraged to seek out their biological parents. I mean, it was amazing how God used that, Doc. So I just want you to know that those words were prophetic.
God bless you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
God bless you guys now.
Okay,
God
bye-bye.
bless you. Wow, that was a great conversation. Great story, and a great man, it seems like.
Absolutely.
We hope you have enjoyed not just our conversation with Sherman Smith tonight, but all the conversations, all of the meaningful conversations that have been shared during the month of August. We hope you've been encouraged, maybe inspired, but also challenged to live life like every day what you do matters, because it does.
It does.
Thanks for joining us.